I fully admit that I wasn't prepared for Bright Memory Infinite. This FPS that can be found on the PC, Xbox Series X and S, and the console I played it on, the Nintendo Switch, cost $19.99, and you could also find a version of it on iOS and Android. See, when I look at the games I'm going to cover, I don't really look at other coverage or any prior history. I don't want any unnecessary bias possibly influencing my opinion, even subconsciously. Sure, I'll read about the game and a description and maybe watch a trailer or two, but I like going in blind, and I've been attempting to use more key services for review requests, and this one, it popped up and intrigued me. So to say that Bright Memory Infinite caught me off guard when I started playing it, it would be, well, that would be an understatement. But before I begin this review legit, this game was obtained from Woovit and the publisher for review and video creation purposes. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? Look, I'm going to be straight up with you right from the get-go. Bright Memory Infinite is not a good game from a traditional sense. If you're expecting a Doom Eternal or Singularity experience here, you are not going to get it. The game not only has major design problems, it also has quirks that really makes the game frustrating for certain players. This is full well understanding that the game was only done by one developer who goes by the handle FYQD originally, and while he may have had help for this version, it's still an accomplishment, especially from a solo creation standpoint. I mean, you don't see this many FPSs with this graphical fidelity created by one person, so I want to give him credit, despite the fact that I may tear into this game from a buyability standpoint. Despite that, there is an audience that will enjoy this game, because if Bright Memory Infinite is anything, it's a NASCAR car crash. And well, there is a certain beauty to a train wreck that is still playable and has moments of fun, despite the damage you may take when playing it. The game opens with a cutscene with little context about Shayla, who's apparently trying to relax, but now it's not the time for that, because a black hole opened up. Yes, a black hole. See, Shayla is part of the SRO, the Supernatural Science Research Organization, which is not named SSRO for some reason. Now granted, I wish the game would have established a lot more earlier on what she did and the state of the world, because the game just sort of throws you into the situation and almost expects you to have prior context to it. And there isn't any. This isn't a sequel. That's something the game constantly suffers from as well. The story, in essence, is held together with duct tape and missing context. But as a scientist with the organization, of course she also has training in ninja samurai mercenary work? Okay, regardless, she's sent out to investigate, and you have people who are fighting you because... Actually, I don't know why they're fighting you, in your world at least. Rival faction? Generic evil? Hell if I know. I mean, there's also a second world with warriors in it, and look. I'm trying honestly to remember what happens in this game, but part of the problem here is that the game definitely suffers from the Chinese-English language barrier. Dialogue is awkward and doesn't make a lot of sense, and I feel like 80% of the story and the background was chopped out at some point. But okay, you're probably not here for the story most likely, you're here for the visuals and the FPS gameplay. But it's important to note that feeling of chaos and missing elements, because it's definitely in other places here. Visually, the game does not look like it was made by one developer when it's at its best, and quite frankly, is the most impressive element of the game. When looking at a landscape and seeing the detail on the rocks or leaves, they are great and remind you of modern FPSs in a lot of ways, even if you could see that they aren't entirely up to snuff in a direct comparison. I am playing this on the Switch, so it isn't necessarily using the greatest of hardware in terms of modern stuff, but it's still impressive nonetheless. Little details do help this at times, like the smoke coming out of your gun, which can sell immersion when you notice them. Unfortunately, the same can be said for the opposite situation. Blood, for example, can feel inhuman at times, where it comes out in ways that don't feel natural, and feels very similar to a step up from low-budget horror movie effects. I feel the game does have a weird mishmash of effects on the Switch, and this can be seen a lot with cutscenes and close-up on models. In one scene, you may see the wrinkles on leather or equivalent material pants, and you can imagine how it would feel in your head. But then, in the same cutscene, you'll get a shirt that looks almost smooth in unnatural ways, almost like the texture didn't load, and you're just sort of confused, like it's almost two different games colliding graphically. I think a lot of the elements were done purposefully for a couple of reasons, and the biggest may be performance. If you were worried about the performance of the game on the Switch, I will happily say that the game does have hiccups, but honestly, not in the worst cases. Most of the times I saw frame drops were after fights were done, especially when the game uses its slow-mo effect, or when it was trying to load a new area. But in battle, I didn't see that many drops. I tested both the docked and handheld mode, and really, both stayed consistent and were definitely playable from a frame rate standpoint. Now, I know a lot of people who follow me do play on the PC primarily, and luckily, one of the people who are in the Discord, the link in the description below, FAQ, decided to give me some footage from the game that he played, so you can see the footage and the actual, performance here. And from what I see, it does perform well, but he did indicate that there were hitches here and there. So, if you want a little bit more information on that, join the Discord. But there's one thing I also want to talk about here. See, Bright Memory Infinite apparently had an early access portion, which I found interesting, especially when it sounds like things were taken out for the actual full release. There was apparently a style element to the game, which would have been interesting, and it actually explains a lot from what I feel about the game. It feels like it is missing elements. It's missing chunks that were supposed to be there, but unfortunately is not there. I mean, I do have to admit that I am a little troubled by this. The fact is, they added things like ray tracing to the PC version of it, which is great and all, but the gameplay, well, let's get into that. As for the gameplay itself, it's an action FPS with melee elements with a katana. You get a couple of different guns with a little flavor twist with special ammo. You start with an assault rifle and you get a more traditional shotgun in terms of non-video games, aka you can actually use it at range reasonably. But the game does twist things up with a pistol that can seemingly do multi-hits of sorts. It's a little strange, but it still feels nice when you get some of the shots off. Aiming, however, is, well, it's a console shooter, sorta. It does have some corrective aim to help controller players, and let me be frank, if you're a veteran of the genre, turn off the weapon aim option in the options menu if you want more of a challenge. Even then, it does seem to snap sometimes to an enemy, and frankly, it can be overzealous with the option on, especially if it determines that a target that you may not have been looking directly at is the one that the aim should lock onto. There were cases, especially in boss fights with multiple targets, with the option on, where it would snap in a way that felt really unnatural and took me out of the moment and was making me fire at something that I didn't mean to fire at. Natural aiming without the option on felt good for the amount of stick movement needed to aim, and the guns felt fine to fire. Now, you can mess with the options in the options menu in terms of the controller, so if the default controls don't work for you, you can adjust it, so that's great. As to the melee, you have a sword slash that can get an upgrade to fire beams of energy, and a reflect block option if you time things right, and honestly, it's a little overpowered if you get the timing of it down. You do also have this weird gravity electrical gauntlet that could push and pull enemies, as well as cause enemies to float, which you can do more damage to them. I will say that you could probably play a good amount of the game with just using melee and the reflect, with the exception of particular sniper-like enemies, and it does allow for a change of pace that helps to vary up gameplay. But level design is really linear and really straightforward in a lot of ways. I would call it a corridor shooter, but the fact that you're out in the open can make it feel like it's wanting to be a little bit more open. There can be maybe 2 or 3 paths to go through in the more complicated sections, and it will still feel very samey when push comes to shove as you go through the game in the shooting sections. Sure, you can get chasms to jump to with limited platforming during the game, and specific sequences like a running sequence to get out of a blast area, but it really doesn't use the enemies in new and interesting ways in the shooting sections, like ambushes from behind, or even something a bit overpowering in numbers. It really keeps things basic in my mind. The game does try to institute stealth sections in the middle of the game, where you have to use a cleaver to kill enemies, but frankly, it really hurts the game's pace, and was frustrating overall. Part of this area's problem is that it can be hard to see where enemies and or the pathways that they take thanks to the specific lighting and section that it occurs at. Sure, you can get through it without being seen, but it feels more like trial and error, and I wanted to just shut the game off at that point. However, the biggest knock on the gameplay is the basic enemy AI. It's where the game lacks the most, as enemies, they have one-track minds in a lot of cases. Now, it's not like they don't have some intelligence. Some will try to slowly come up on you and won't just rush you, exposing themselves. But they are also horribly predictable to the point where you can exploit them even in those cases. It doesn't help that they don't seem to use cover as much as they should at times, being out in the open where someone can just pick them off, unless they're a sniper type. It feels a lot like the AI doesn't have any want to back up or even retreat to another location, or to change their strategy if something happened, and the game does suffer for it when it comes to the fun factor. I feel like I'm just mowing down guys over and over again until the game gives me a substantial challenge, which usually is a boss fight. Boss fights are frustrating in their own way, but definitely show that there is a solid system at the core here. Blocking bullets and recognizing boss patterns is important, and the final boss in particular forces you to change up your strategy a lot, moving around and trying to avoid the damage. They can feel like bullet sponges at times, taking a ton of damage, but it's where I felt the game pushed me the most, and where I died legitimately the most. And illegitimately. Why I say illegitimately is the fact that when it comes to sound design, or even damage indication, the game doesn't necessarily do the greatest job of telling you the where or the what. You'll see damage and the screen getting more bloody, but it doesn't really distinguish the eagle throwing sonic shots at you or the fire that you're walking through burning you up. You'll be like, wait, I died? And realize that an enemy popped out of nowhere. And you'll wonder, wait, was he there before? You'll wonder if the game is bugging out. And here, here is where the game becomes that train wreck. This game is a technical mess, especially in the bugs category. There is no way around that. It almost happened on almost every level of implementation here, and it hits the gambit of quality. And look, there are bugs that happen that don't really affect the overall picture that badly. A texture loading incorrectly or fading out a little bit too quickly outside the action, not really a problem and not really a bug in a lot of cases. The game not recognizing me hitting the button right away in a cutscene QuickTime event to the point where I'm wondering if it's registering? Yeah, that's annoying, and it is a bug per se, but it does eventually get it, and the fact is, these aren't what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about are the implementation details that allow scenes like this, where enemies are firing upon me, despite the fact that I'm behind a wall, can't be hit, and keep on moving in ways that, well, defy the laws of gravity at times. This on top of the meter, in which is supposed to be like the alert meter in Metal Gear Solid in this area. Pretty sure that if they are firing upon me, that shouldn't be going down. It's getting a car stuck in a tree during a chase sequence with no way of getting out of it, regardless of what I do. This, by the way, was within the first 5 seconds of driving the car in the game, so it left a lasting impression. I had to restart checkpoints several times because something like this happened, like a prompt for getting a grapple just wouldn't go no matter what I did. And the crashes. I believe the number of crashes I had overall was 4, and let me be clear here. Bright Memory Infinite is a short game. The campaign can be completed in 2 hours. So for me to crash that many times in that time frame for what is supposed to be an improved release on a new console, yeah, I'm concerned how it passed certification in several ways. It's gonna sound like I'm beating up the solo developer for the state of the release. And look, I don't want to do that per se. I want to show any dev where they went wrong and how they can improve their releases for the future. Like how the ammo pickup prompts can be so hard to read in the middle of fighting and battle that I literally don't know what it's saying or what even button to push at times. Or when I failed one of the first QuickTime events because the text blended into the background and I didn't even see it. It's something that maybe he saw the first time and didn't think was a problem, but having another set of eyes would have been like, wait, hold on a second, I can't see that. In all of this, however, the game suffers from what I call sonic boom syndrome. See, there are better games that I've played from a quality standpoint than Bright Memory Infinite that I didn't enjoy as much. Mother Gunchip is a prime example of this. And why is that? Because the chaos of the bugs and the jankiness of the gameplay led to comical situations that just had me laughing at certain points in the absurdity, where the game's weird story and goofy nature made me goofy and experiment in weird ways, like circling an enemy over and over again and blocking whatever they did. I made my own fun at times, and sure, there's technical problems, but the atmosphere made the game more fun, even in ways that I really should have been throwing the controller across the room. With my scoring system, the objective nature of the main score suffers badly in this case. I mean, from an FPS standpoint, it isn't that much of a different game compared to others even at the same price point, and others do it a lot better. It's got technical issues. The enemy AI isn't anything to write home about. And while boss fights and the visuals can seem great at times, the overall lack of impact of the 2 hours and difficulty helped put the game in the not buy category, scoring a 45 out of 100, making it not a buy. But that's where my enhancer system comes into play, which takes the more subjective elements of games and tries to match a game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability rating for you. I will admit that Bright Memory Infinite will have an audience that likes games that are chaotic and somewhat buggy, but it has intangibles in its presentation, its goofy nature, and will appeal to some. And if you enjoy the fact that one dev put this together by himself and want to support that, well, in my opinion, this is a game that you can feel great even with the faults in it. That's it for this review, and coming soon to the channel is a game that surprised me in a completely different way, Eyes in the Dark. Look for that review within the week, and if you like this video and this review, consider subscribing or even hitting that like button. And of course, give me feedback of what I can improve in this review in the comments section below. That's it for now, and as always, keep on gaming.